What if the world's most enduring story of divine punishment was not about the sins of early man, but about the fall of a legendary, godlike civilization? What if the deluge that cleansed the earth, a tale etched into the very soul of humanity through the holy texts of the Bible and the Quran, was in fact a final, cataclysmic chapter of a story whispered to us from across the millennia? Stay with me. By the end of this video, you won't just be choosing between myth and history. You'll be forced to ask whether you are living through the next Atlantis right now. Welcome, soul traveler, to the crossroads of myth, faith, and forbidden history. Today, we venture into the deep, dark waters of the past, seeking not just a story, but a memory encoded in our very DNA, a shadow that flickers at the edge of our collective consciousness. If topics like this speak to something deep in you, tap into this archive by subscribing now, because this is only the beginning. We will explore the sacred accounts of Noah's flood and the philosophical chronicles of Plato, not as separate tales, but as echoes of the same world-shattering event, two faces of a forgotten truth. Prepare yourself, for the secrets we are about to explore suggest that the Great Flood was not an end, but a violent, cosmic transition. It was the moment a golden age, an era of impossible technology and spiritual grandeur, was submerged in the waters of oblivion, leaving behind only survivors, a sacred vessel, and a memory that would become the fragmented This is the story of how the destruction of Atlantis may have been immortalized as the cleansing flood of Noah. To begin our sacred journey, we must first attune ourselves to the vibrations of the narratives that have shaped civilizations. In the book of Genesis, and with profound resonance in the surahs of the Quran, we are told of a time when the world had become untethered from the divine. It was filled with corruption and wickedness. But what does this corruption truly mean? Was it mere petty crime and moral failing? Or does it hint at something far deeper? A spiritual sickness of planetary scale. Look around at our own world for a moment. Wars, engineered pandemics, digital addictions, a planet pushed to its limits. Does it feel so different from an Antediluvian crisis? Or are we simply repeating an ancient pattern with shinier tools? The esoteric traditions speak of this antediluvian world not as a primitive age, but as the culmination of a vast cosmic cycle. It was an era where humanity, or a branch of it, had achieved powers that rivaled those of the gods. The corruption was not one of morals, but of essence. It was a loss of vibrational harmony, a time when sacred knowledge was weaponized, when the very fabric of life was manipulated for selfish gain, severing the connection between heaven and earth. The violence that filled the earth was not just physical, it was a psychic and spiritual violence against the natural order of the cosmos. Seeing this profound imbalance, God, or Allah, resolves to cleanse the earth with a great flood. This was not an act of anger, but one of cosmic law, like a fever breaking to save the body. It was a necessary rebalancing of a world that had strayed too far from the source, an intervention to prevent a fatal disharmony from consuming all of creation. Yet, amidst this spiritual wasteland, one man is found righteous. Noah, or Nah. He is not just a good man. He is an anchor point for the light, a soul who has maintained his connection to the divine frequency amidst the growing cacophony. He receives a divine command, a blueprint from the cosmic mind, to build a great ark. This was no simple boat. It was a sanctuary, a floating microcosm of life's sacred geometry, a living library designed to carry the frequency of creation through the storm of destruction. Into this ark, he was to gather his family and pairs of every living creature, preserving the essential patterns, the logos, the very seed of life, from the coming oblivion. The holy texts describe the event with a terrifying, sublime grandeur. The fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. This is the language of total cosmic collapse, a union of destructive forces from the world below and the world above. The waters represent a dissolution of form, the return to primeval chaos. Rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, a number deeply symbolic of trial, purification, and transition in virtually every mystical tradition, until the highest mountains, the very symbols of worldly power and human pride, were covered. The world that was perished. The civilization that humanity had built was washed clean. When the waters receded, a process as slow and deliberate as their rising, the ark came to rest upon a mountain, Ararat, a new foundation for a new world. A new covenant was made, sealed by a rainbow, a perfect spectrum of light, a promise that the creative principle would never again be so utterly destroyed by the purifying principle of water. Noah and his descendants were tasked with repopulating the earth, beginning a new cycle for humanity, carrying a fractured memory of a world lost forever. But what if another culture recorded not the story of the righteous survivor, but the story of the glorious civilization that was destroyed? Now, let us travel from the realm of sacred scripture to the philosophical heart of ancient Greece, to the dialogues of Plato. In his works, Timaeus and Critias, Plato introduces us to a story he insists is veritable history, passed down from the priests of Egypt. He speaks of a mighty island nation located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Atlantis. Atlantis was an empire born of the union between a god, Poseidon, and a mortal woman, a race of demigods. Plato describes it with a longing detail, a capital city of concentric rings of land and water, a marvel of sacred geometry. Its temples and palaces were sheathed in gold, silver, and a mysterious, fire-gleaming metal called orichalcum. Its people were spiritually and technologically advanced. They had flying machines, mastered crystal technology for power and healing, and understood the subtle energies of consciousness. For many generations, they lived in a state of virtue, their society a reflection of the divine order. But as the cycles of time turned, their divine nature became diluted. Esoteric sources, like the readings of Edgar Cayce, speak of a great schism that tore Atlantean society apart. They were the sons of the law of one, who adhered to the spiritual path and understood their technology as a sacred trust. And there were the sons of Belial, a materialistic and power-hungry faction who saw technology as a means of control. They engaged in genetic manipulation, creating hybrid creatures to serve as a slave class, and twisted the life force for personal gain. This was the true corruption. This was the hubris. And if this sounds uncomfortably familiar, it should. Every time a civilization forgets that power is sacred, history quietly sharpens its scythe. Their ambition grew until they sought to dominate the known world. And then came the judgment. In a single, dreadful day and night of misfortune, Atlantis was struck by violent earthquakes and floods. The great island nation, with all its splendor, all its knowledge, and all its people, was swallowed by the sea and vanished forever. Do you feel the resonance, soul traveler? A highly advanced civilization that falls into spiritual corruption through the misuse of power. In a moment, we're going to step out of myth and into the raw geological evidence, a moment in Earth's history that lines up eerily with Plato's timeline, and may prove this was all very real, a divine judgment that is a direct consequence of their actions, and a final cataclysmic flood. Are these two separate stories? Or are they two interpretations, one focusing on the survivors, the other on the fallen, of the same planet-altering event? When we place these narratives side by side, the threads of connection become a luminous web. The first parallel is the cataclysm itself. As Ignatius Donnelly first proposed, the flood myths from every corner of the globe are a shared human trauma. From the Ziusudra of Sumer to the Hindu Manu, from the Aztec Coxcox to the myths of the Hopi who speak of escaping recurring world destructions, the pattern is undeniable. Humanity collectively remembers a time when the world was drowned. The second, deeper thread is the moral justification. The sons of God who interbred with the daughters of men in Genesis could be an allegory for the dilution of the Atlantean divine bloodline that Plato describes, or the genetic experiments of the sons of Belial. The violence that filled the earth was not just warfare, but the spiritual violence of a people who played God with the building blocks of life. The third connection lies in the survivors. Plato's account ends with destruction, but esoteric traditions insist a select group, the priesthood of the law of one, foresaw the disaster. They escaped in a coordinated diaspora, carrying the sacred knowledge to different parts of the world. Think of the mysterious, bearded, light-skinned civilizer gods who appear in myths across the Americas after a great cataclysm. Viroqa in the Andes, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica. They arrive from the sea, bringing the gifts of agriculture, astronomy, and law to primitive peoples. Were these figures not gods, but the surviving high priests of Atlantis, the real-life Noah figures, establishing new centers of civilization from the ashes of the old? This brings us back to the Ark. Could the Ark be a profound metaphor for a vessel of knowledge, a repository of the sacred sciences, genetics, and history of the Antediluvian world? Could Noah be the archetype of the high priest, tasked with preserving the wisdom of a fallen age? The animals entering 2 by 2 could be a metaphor for preserving the genetic blueprint of life, and more deeply, the dualistic principles of universal law, the masculine and the feminine, light and dark, that formed the basis of all creation. The Ark was a container for the patterns of reality. It was a time capsule of consciousness. But if all of this is more than poetic metaphor, we should expect to see some trace of that cataclysm in the earth itself. And we do. This theory is not confined to myth. Geologists speak of the end of the last ice age, around 11,600 years ago, a time that aligns eerily with Plato's date for the fall of Atlantis. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that a fragmented comet struck the Earth, triggering a global winter, followed by catastrophic melting and megafloods of a scale we can barely comprehend. To any who witnessed it, this would have been the wrath of God. But the most enduring scars of such a disaster would not just be carved into rocks and ice. They would be etched into the human psyche itself. But perhaps the most profound dimension of this story is not historical, but psychological. The great psychologist Carl Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypes and memories that all of humanity inherits. Within this deep well of the psyche, the story of a lost paradise, a fallen golden age, is one of the most powerful and persistent archetypes. Atlantis, in this sense, is not just a place that may have existed in the ocean. It is a place that exists within us. It represents our own highest potential, our capacity for genius, creativity, and spiritual enlightenment. But it also represents our shadow. The hubris of the Atlanteans is the hubris of our own ego, which can take the gifts of consciousness and use them for domination and control rather than for unity and love. The Great Flood then becomes a powerful metaphor for a necessary psychological crisis. It is the moment when the constructs of the ego become so corrupt and rigid that they must be dissolved. The waters of the unconscious rise up to overwhelm the conscious mind, forcing a death of the old self, so that a new, more integrated consciousness, the survivor, the inner Noah, can be born. Have you not, in your own life, experienced moments where your world had to fall apart completely so that something new and more authentic could be built in its place? If you're feeling that echo as you listen, you're not alone. That's the ancient story waking up inside you. That is the flood. That is the echo of Atlantis within your own soul. This story, therefore, operates on every level simultaneously. It may be a literal, historical memory of a physical place. It is certainly a geological echo of a time of great cataclysm on Earth. And it is, without a doubt, a profound psychological and spiritual map of the journey of the human soul. So, we are left standing at the shore of a great and silent ocean of mystery. Was Noah's flood the destruction of Atlantis? The evidence suggests that these are not two stories, but one grand, multifaceted epic of our own origins, a story of our forgotten greatness and our capacity for self-destruction. It teaches us that we are part of a grand cosmic cycle. The fate of Atlantis is not just a story of the past. It is a timeless and urgent warning for the present. It speaks of the sacred balance between technological power and spiritual wisdom. When a civilization's ambition outgrows its compassion, when its knowledge is not tempered by humility, it plants the seeds of its own demise. And right now, in our world of algorithms, satellites, and supercomputers, that balance has never been more fragile. The Ark, in its deepest sense, is the sacred wisdom that survives these cycles. It is the perennial philosophy, the eternal truth. We, the inheritors of this post-Diluvian world, carry a fragment of that preserved Atlantean light within our own souls, waiting to be rediscovered. The question then is not just what happened in the past, but what we will do with its legacy. Are we listening? Or are we, in our own modern age of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and planetary exploitation, building our own Atlantis, poised on the brink of another great cleansing? The answer, soul traveler, lies within each of us. For we are the descendants of the survivors, and the choice to build a new ark of wisdom, or to be swept away by the tides of our own hubris, is, and always has been, our own. The fate of the world is not written in the stars, but in the choices we make in every moment. If this exploration into the forgotten chapters of our past has awakened something within you, share this video and join our community of seekers by subscribing to the channel. If you stay with me to this point, you are not a casual viewer. You are part of the remnant who still asks the forbidden questions. Let us know in the comments. Do you believe the flood myths are a memory of Atlantis? And what lessons should our world learn from its fall? For our journey into the greatest mysteries of existence is a path we must walk together. Thank you for watching.